Hey, what's good, fam? I'm here today to talk to you guys about my most confident picks, my least confident picks, and a little preview into my bets for UFC Houston, Strickland versus Hernandez. And I know I talk shit about this fight card, and I thought the main event was really carrying this UFC fight night. But I went back, I took another look, and there's actually some pretty good matchups on this card. There's some pretty solid matchmaking, and there's actually a lot of fights I'm curious to see how they play out. But ultimately, they put together a good one. And these tweeners, so it's like not a numbered UFC event, or what everyone used to call them, pay-per-views. But it's not a fight night in the Apex. Usually when they do these fight nights out in a city, they tend to deliver. And they do say everything's bigger in Texas. So I think the fighters are going to go out and put on a show for the fans in Houston. There's definitely going to be a good presence in the crowd. And ultimately, I think this one's going to be one of the better fight cards of the year. So with that being said, let's dive in to my most confident picks for UFC Houston. And kicking it off, Carly Judas. I like Carly Judas, man. This girl's tough. She's got hands. She's got good leg kicks. She's no slouch on the ground. Overall, just a good women's MMA fighter. And I think she's gonna go in there and do quick work of Juliana Miller. Honestly, I just don't see what Juliana Miller has to provide other than sloppy takedowns and playing from her back for attempting submissions from guard. Carly Judas, on the other hand, that crisp striking, I can ultimately see her getting a standing TKO win against Juliana Miller. I think just the damage is going to add up to the point where the ref has to step in and stop the fight, or Juliana Miller clinches with Carly Judas because, she can't take more damage. And then Carly Judas takes her down and then just finishes her off with some ground and pound. But give me Carly Judas to get it done over Juliana Miller. And then my second most confident pick, Jean Paul Lebosnoyani. I like this kid, man. This dude is a solid welterweight 170er. And what a better way to get yourself into the UFC. There is no better way to get yourself into the UFC by a right hook leg kick on the Contender Series. I did go back and see some regional tape on this kid too. And this dude's just overall just well-rounded, man. He's part of that next gen where they just come in with a full MMA background, arsenal, whether it's in the striking, the grappling, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. This dude's good. 27 years old, young. I think this dude's going to go in there, get it done over Phil Rowe. Phil Rowe is a durable guy. He's battled against adversity multiple times. So I don't see him finishing him, but I do see him going in there and putting on a good performance and getting a clear decision win over Phil Rowe. Jean Paul was supposed to fight Austin Vanderford. I thought that would have been a more interesting matchup for him because Austin presents that wrestling pressure, high paced style, which it would have been interesting to see how Jean Paul would have handled that. But against Phil Rowe doesn't really have anything to offer on the feet. I think his bread and butter is on the ground, his submission attempts. But I think Jean Paul, even if it goes to the ground, he's going to play it safe, be safe, not put himself in dangerous positions. And then just on the feet, he's just fast. He has good striking. He has power in those hands. And I just see him getting it done over Phil Rowe. Then we got Ante Delija. I like Ante Delija. I wasn't too big of a fan of him in coming into the UFC because I didn't really know much about him. I just knew that he was fighting against a guy on the side of Waldo Cortez Acosta, who I was a fan of. So I was rooting against Ante Delija. But going back and watching that fight again, this dude's got fast hands, man, especially for a 35-year-old heavyweight. I think he goes in there and kind of puts on that pace and that striking against a guy like Sergey Spivak, who doesn't really offer anything on the feet. You know, he was able to land on Waldo Cortez Acosta, who is a solid striker. You know, he's good on the feet. You know, has good striking, good defense. But Sergey Spivak doesn't have any of that. His bread and butter, I guess you could say, is his ground game. You know, getting it to the mat and doing work from there. But I see Ante Delija getting a KO win over Sergey Spivak. This dude, I don't know if he is, you know, championship level at heavyweight just because he's 35 years old. You know, maybe if he was younger, I could see that in his future. But against a guy like Sergey Spivak, he'll get it done. He'll probably, you know, come into problems against a top 5 guy. But Sergey Spivak, please, man, please. I think he's one fight away from getting cut from the UFC. So Ante Delija might be the guy to do that. And then we got Melquizael Costa. I was like this close from not having this as my most confident picks just because I kept going back. And, you know, Dan Ige is a solid fighter. But Melquizael Costa has shown so much improvement and so much growth to his game that I had to add him here. I like Costa. I like his striking. I like his grappling. He doesn't have necessarily like the best takedowns, but he is able to reverse positions on the ground. He has good submission attempts. And against a guy like Dan Ige, who we know Dan Ige has power in his hands. You know, if he does land, it could be catastrophic here, but I think Melquizael Costa is in his prime right now. He's, I believe, 28 or 29 on the fight win streak. He is bringing in the momentum. The only caveat is, like, you know, Dan Ige has fought the higher level of competition, but I think this is the next step for a guy like Costa. You know, he's beating guys like Christian Rodriguez, Andre Fili. He just beat Morgan Charrier, which I thought was a super impressive win just because that fight was 50-50. Some people, not even some, like, you know, evenly split. Some people were on Morgan Charrier, some people were on Costa, and he went out there and knocked that dude out, which we know Morgan Charrier was a durable and good striker. So coming here against a guy like Dan Ige, I think it'd be smart for him to mix up the grappling, you know, threaten the takedowns or go for the takedowns. You know, a cheeky bet here is Melquizael Costa by submission, and, you know, I'm just alluding to maybe a bet that I got cooking up. But even if he doesn't get the submission, I think he's just gonna add, you know, he's gonna do more on the feet. He's gonna have the volume, and Dan Ige might land the bigger shots in like one round, but ultimately I just see Costa landing at a higher clip, racking up those significant strikes, and possibly getting a decision win here against Dan Ige. So give me Costa. And then we got Yadir Del Valle. Yadir has been, you know, the on the bad end of some of the like biggest controversy in the UFC like this year, being that, you know, illegal operations of Isaac Delgarian and his team. You know, allegedly he threw that fight against Yadir Del Valle, and Yadir did get a pretty quick submission win. You know, if you go back and look at that fight, you can definitely see that, you know, it could have been staged. But that fight aside, Yadir is a really good fighter. His striking is good. You know, he does have power in those hands. He's fast. I think his bread and butter, or at least what he's known for, is his submission game, you know, the grappling. And against a guy like Jordan Levitt, I think he's going to be able to do enough on the feet where he doesn't even have to rely on his grappling or submission game. Jordan Levitt doesn't really have anything to offer on the feet. You know, we know that he is primarily a grappler. He'll try to look for the takedowns and take the mat and take the fight to the mat. But yeah, there should do quick work of Jordan Levitt. You know, he could piece him up on the feet, maybe he takes it to the ground, or Jordan Levitt tries for a takedown. I think it'd be smart for Yair just to have a striking match with Jordan Levitt, because once you enter the ground, I want to say it's going to be more of a 50-50 than if you're just striking with Jordan Levitt. So give me Yair Del Valle. I think he has a clear advantage in the striking department. On the ground, I think it is kind of like more evenly matched. So that being said, give me Yair to get it done over Jordan Levitt. And then last on the list, Jacoby Smith. I like this guy. This dude is a potential prospect. He's coming off a TKO win. Before that, a TKO. He's beating guys like Nico Price, Preston Parsons. He's doing what he's supposed to do, building his way up, slowly. And I think a guy like, Josiah Harrell is his name. He was supposed to fight Kyo Seo Kyun. I believe his name is Seo Kyun. Forgot. But I thought that was going to be an interesting matchup. That dude is like more of a sambo fighter. And I think that would have been a good test for Jacoby Smith. But here they're just giving him a guy they picked up on the regional scene. Josiah, he is, I believe, 11-0. So he does have a pretty good record. But I'm confident in Jacoby Smith here. I think he'll be able to do enough, even if he doesn't get the finish. I see him getting his hand raised against a guy like Josiah Harrell. All right, and then for the most or the least confident picks for this fight card, Ramiz Brahimaj. I like Ramiz, but at 170, Punale Soriano has shown, improvements to his game. He is on a 3-fight win streak at 170. His only losses have really been at 185, and I think he fills in good at 170. I just like Ramiz's submission game a little bit more, because we can see Soriano possibly shoot in this match, and I can see Ramiz locking up a guillotine. He is known for his guillotine, and then on the feet, I think Ramiz is probably just going to outstrike or outland Soriano. Soriano definitely carries the power and is going to look to land the bigger shots, but I think Ramiz is going to be able to do enough to stay safe. There is always a potential where he does get rocked and then it gets a little dicey, which is why I have him as one of my least confident picks. So I see Ramiz maybe getting a submission win here by guillotine against Soriano, or a close decision win, but I'm not that confident in that one. And then one of my probably the least confident pick on this card is Michel Pereira. Michel Pereira, we know he's on a bit of a losing streak. He really, that Anthony Hernandez fight, that fluffy fight, really just took his soul from him, and he's been a different fighter ever since. But I think he's back in the gym. He's working with Sean Strickland. I think he has that spark back in, and I think against a guy like Zachary Reese, I think it's a good matchup. Zachary Reese, we have seen him get knocked out. He got knocked out by Cody Brundage when he slammed it to the mat, and I forgot who else got knocked him out. But Zachary Reese is a knockout or bust fighter, and I think that's what's going to happen here. I think Michel Pereira is probably going to knock him out. He's probably going to be on the bad end of a KO in Zachary Reese. Again, not confident at all just because of Michel Pereira's past few fights. I hope he can turn it around and get a W. I think it would mean a lot for him and for his career, just because if he does get another L, we can potentially be seeing this guy out of the UFC at that point. And then next on the list, Jeff Neal. I just can't get over. I think Jeff Neal is the better fighter going into this Euros Medic fight. I think Euros is not a top 15, top 10 guy, especially at welterweight, one of the most stacked divisions. Jeff Neal has just fought the better level of competition. He's fought guys like Carlos Prates. I believe he also fought, Ian Gary. I wanted to double check, but he did fight Ian Gary. He fought RDA, which he did get a win over, but then before that, he fought Shavkat. That's right. Shavkat. So he's definitely fought the higher level of competition. And I don't want to say Jeff Neal is a gatekeeper into like the top 15 at welterweight, but he kind of is. And I don't think Uros Medics is that guy. He is coming off, a good win himself, and he's gotten some pretty decent knockout wins. I want to say the knockout was against. Yeah, he got a win against Muslim Salikov and then Gilbert Arena. So even that, he lost against Soriano, beat Tim Means. He hasn't fought the highest level of competition. The only reason I'm not that confident in Jeff Neal is because he's coming off a KO loss against Carlos Prates, like a spinning back elbow. So I don't know how Jeff Neal is because it hasn't been that much time since that KO loss. But ultimately, Jeff Neal should go in here. I do think it's probably going to end in the distance. This fight is not going to go the distance, but probably would play this fight to end by KO better. But I like Jeff Neal. I think he's the better fighter. He ultimately should get the win. If he does get KO'd, so be it. But that's why he's on the least confident picks. And then next we got Carlos Leal. I was pretty confident in Carlos Leal, but Chidi Njokuani is a good fighter. He is good at range, and even if it is on the clinch, he's got that nasty Muay Thai to land some elbows, some knees. I think Carlos Leal turns this into a brawl, and he gets it into that like boxing range where Chidi can't really throw the elbows or the knees, but he is in that kicking range. So I think Carlos Leal is going to do a good job, and he also has the grappling edge in this one against Chidi. So you can see him try to mix that in. I do have him on my least confident picks just because I went and I saw the odds, and I was really surprised to see him go from such a big favorite to almost now an underdog. And I did go do some research, and I saw that it was because he has a cut under his chin. So yeah, and it was like, I want to say like 3 weeks ago. So we can see that if he goes into the grappling exchanges, that cut open up, and it might not look good to the judges if we see more damage, technically damage on him just because of a cut. So it can get a little dicey, and I also think Chidi's a good fighter, but ultimately Carlos Leal, he thrives in the chaos, and I think that's what he's going to turn this fight into. And Chidi is, I believe, for most of his career, been a middleweight. So he is coming down to Carlos Leal. He is draining himself a little bit more to make the weight. And Carlos Leal, he looks like he's on steroids, man. I don't know if he is, but he definitely packs a punch, and he's heavy-handed. So if he does land on the Chidi at 170, who knows what type of damage he'll cause. So Carlos Leal, not that confident, but still going to be my pick. And then Alibi Idris. At first I had Ade Osborne, but I think Alibi Idris, he has an edge in the grappling, and I think he will implement it here against a guy like Ade Osborne and possibly get a submission win. I think on the feet, Ade Osborne is the better striker, and that's why I was kind of torn, but ultimately I ended up going with Alibi Idris. I did have in my early lean, or at least predictions and pick video, Ade Osborne, but as more time goes by and we get closer to the fight, I think Alibi is a guy who's probably going to strike to set up the takedowns and the grappling, and the grappling. And then when it does hit the ground, Ade Osborne hasn't shown to have the best, submission defense or be the best getting back up to his feet. So give me Alibi Idris. Again, not reason why he's on the, least confident picks, but I'll have him as my pick here against Ade Osborne. And then going from the full fight card from top to bottom, you guys all know who the least confident pick of this card is, and that is Michel Pereira. It's hard to back a guy who's on a 3-fight losing streak, man, and coming off of a KO loss. So Michel Pereira is going to have to wear that, number 14. Then Ramiz Brahimaj, I think he's fighting a guy who is also carrying momentum into his fight, who has shown to be good at 170, who I believe has the heavier hands, has the more power in his hands than Ramiz. But I just think Ramiz has a little bit more tools in his game, so that's why he's up there. Then Alibi Idris, I think Alibi has the grappling edge in that fight against Ade Osborne. I think he'll be able to take him down, but if he doesn't get the submission and he isn't able to get those takedowns, we can see Ade Osborne win that fight. Then Carlos Leal, again, that cut is a little worrisome, but if he does keep the fight at boxing range, he'll be able to get this one done. Again, Chidi is a pretty good fighter. He's a good Muay Thai fighter. He's very technical. He's very crisp. In that clinch, he'll land those elbows, those knees, and that range. He's got the length to land some nasty kicks. But I think Carlos Lau, with the power, with the aggressiveness, turning this fight, more into a brawl, will ultimately get it done against Chidi. And then 10, Jeff Neal. I think Jeff Neal just has more experience. He's just fought the higher level of competition. He's literally fought the guys who are in title content. Like Shavkat was title contendant until, I think he got injured, is no longer ranked. Ian Gary, who might be fighting for a title. Carlos Prates, who's probably the killer in that division. Like, one of the most savage guys. So he just had a heavier slate than Uros Medic, and I don't see Uros Medic being a top 10 welterweight. So give me Jeff Neal. Then Alden Correa. This guy's fighting a guy in Luis Gurul who is coming off of 2 losses. So, his back is up against the wall, and I think Luis is gonna probably try to go out there and win any way he can. Just because of a 3-fight losing streak, he can be seeing his way out of the UFC. But I like Alden Correa. This guy's a promising flyweight and ultimately, gets it done. Then number 8, Jocelyn Edwards in that rematch against Nora Cordonol. I like Jocelyn Edwards. She has shown improvement. She has shown growth in her game. And ultimately, that's why I'm picking her. However, Nora is a tough girl. And in women's fights, you can never be too sure. So I will say, I think Jocelyn Edwards wins this one, but, we never know. It is a rematch, and supposedly statistics are the fighter who wins the first fight usually ends up winning the rematch, or I think it's more than 50%. But I think Jocelyn Edwards has just shown more improvement than Nora Cordonol to get this one done. And then Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. I know I didn't talk about this one, but Sean Strickland, man, the more we get closer to the fight, the more 50-50 I am in this one. I do think Anthony Hernandez is going to take Sean Strickland into deep waters in the grappling. I just know that Sean Strickland has a gas tank, but we know that, the striking gas tank is different than the grappling. But ultimately, I'm still going to take Anthony Hernandez here. I do see him getting the takedowns eventually and racking up that damage on the ground. I don't know if he put Sean Strickland away, but I could see him getting it done on the scorecards. And then Melky Costa, number 6. Like I said before, I think Dan Ige is just past his prime, towards the later end of his career. And Melky Costa is in his prime and has shown growth in his game. And I think this is the rightful next step for him. Then number 5, Jacoby Smith. He's fighting a guy who's, coming from the regional scene as a replacement. He's on short notice. And Jacoby Smith has shown to potentially be that guy, So give me Jacoby Smith. And then number 4, Yader Del Valle. I think that fight against, sorry, my dog, 1 second. My dog wanted to dip the room. Yader Del Valle, he, even disregarding the Isaac Dogarian fight, Yader Del Valle, if you go watch his regional tape, if you go watch his previous fights, this dude is a savage and has potential to climb up the rankings in the featherweight division. So give me Yader Del Valle. Number 3, Carly Judas. I know what I said about women's fight for, when speaking about the Jocelyn Edwards versus Nora Cornell, but, there's levels, even in women's MMA, and I think Carly Judas is on another level than Juliana Miller. And it's just clear, it's clearly shown on their past performances, and, you put two together, and Carly Judas should get this one done. Then number 2, Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani. I like this guy, man. I like this guy coming in with a spectacular win on the Contender Series. And I see him doing work of Phil Rowe, a guy who is a veteran in the UFC and is a durable guy. But Jean-Paul is just, like I said, that next gen. Those fighters that come in ready in all aspects of the game. And I think he's going to put those on display in this fight. And then number 1, Ante Delija. I just have no faith in Sergey Spivak. I think he has nothing to offer on the feet. We've seen how fast Ante's hands are. His striking at 35 years old is still spectacular for a heavyweight, and he's gonna go out there and possibly get a KO win over Sergey Spivak. All right, and then a little bit of preview. So the safety parlay and the cycle parlay. Number 1, I'm going to be releasing in this video. So for the safety parlay, I am going to go with my two most confident picks, my top 2. And last week, not last week, but the week before, or the last UFC fight card, the safety parlay also hit. So, hopefully we start a streak here, man. From now on, I'm going to be tracking these, and I'm excited. We got our first safety parlay hit of the year. And knock on wood, that shit keeps rolling, and we don't see another L until maybe 2030. But who knows? But I like both guys. Jean-Paul should get it done against Phil Rowe, and Ante Delija against Sergey Spivak. Then cycle parlay number 1, Ante Delija by KO. I think he's going to do his best work on the feet, get Sergey out of there. Then Costa by submission. I know I spoke about this earlier. I think this is a cheeky bet. And I think Costa is going to possibly implement the grappling against a guy like Dan Ige and get a submission win here. And then Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani by decision. If Phil Rowe wasn't durable, or if I hadn't seen him battle against adversity in past fights, I probably would have had Jean-Paul by either KO or submission. But I think he'll be able to survive on the ground. If anything, Phil Rowe is the one that's going to be looking for submission attempts, and then on the feet, I think Jean-Paul is just going to land the cleaner strikes, rack up some damage, but ultimately maybe not be enough to get Phil Rowe out of there. So yeah, Ante Delija by KO, Costa by submission, and JPL by decision. All right, and that is all for you guys today. I might be dropping another video closer to the fights with the rest of my bets, so stay tuned. And like always, please like and subscribe this video. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. I hope you guys like this one, and stay tuned for the next one.